How did the burnt offering from the flock differ from that from the herd? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on walking through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Leviticus chapter 1. We're going to be reading from verses 10 to 17. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus chapter 1, beginning at verse 10. If his offering is of the flocks, of the sheep, or of the goats, as a burnt sacrifice he shall bring a male without blemish. He shall kill it on the north side of the altar before the Lord. And the priests, Aaron's sons, shall sprinkle its blood all around on the altar. And he shall cut it into its pieces, with its head and its fat, and the priest shall lay them in order on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. But he shall wash the entrails and legs with water. Then the priest shall bring it all and burn it on the altar. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. And of the burnt offering of his offering to the Lord is of the birds. Then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or young pigeons. The priest shall bring it to the altar, wring off its head, and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out at the side of the altar. And he shall remove its crop with its feathers and cast it beside the altar on the east side into the place for ashes. Then he shall split it at its wings, but shall not divide it completely. And the priest shall burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. In our last episode, we discussed the burnt offering that came from the herd. We found that it was to be a male without blemish, and it was to be offered willingly. The person offering the sacrifice was to kill it and prepare it for the altar, while the priest was to prepare the altar, sprinkle the blood around the altar, and actually offer the animal on the altar. The burnt offering, though, did not have to exclusively come from the herd. It could also come from the flock. This would be a recognition that not all of the people would be farmers and have these animals. Some would keep sheep or goats. The burnt offering of the flock would differ, though only slightly, from that of the herd. Like the burnt offering from the herd, the burnt offering from the flock was to be a male without blemish. Again, God would not accept an inferior sacrifice. The person who brought the sheep was to kill the animal, since this was his sacrifice. The difference between that of the herd was where the animal was to be killed. The animal from the herd was to be brought and killed near the door of the tabernacle of meeting, which would be the east side of the court. The burnt offering from the flock was to be killed on the north side of the altar before the Lord, which if you entered at the door of the tabernacle of meeting would be on the right side of the altar. Why the difference? We're not exactly sure, but perhaps it's because the size of the animal makes it easier to kill it soon upon entering the court and then preparing it where the sheep or goats were prepared. Whatever the case, where the sheep or goats were to be killed was specified, so the instructions needed to be followed. Other than that, the instructions were the same. The blood from the animal was to be sprinkled by the priest all around the altar. The animal was to be cut into pieces by the person bringing the sacrifice, and then those pieces, along with the head and the fat, were to be burned on the altar. The leg and the entrails were to be washed by the person bringing the sacrifice, and that too was to be placed on the altar by the priest. Doing this would produce a sweet aroma to the Lord. It is not that the Lord liked the smell of the smoke from burning animals. The sweet aroma to the Lord is found in the faith and obedience of the one making the sacrifice. Such is always a sweet aroma to the Lord. Coming down to verse 14, we find that provisions were made for the burnt offering from the birds. Back in verse 2, God told Israel that their burnt sacrifices were to come from the flocks or the herds. Why then do we have instructions for a burnt offering coming from the birds? Although the passage doesn't directly tell us, from Leviticus 12 verse 8, we can infer that this provision was made for the poor or those unable to make the sacrifice from the herd of the flock. God doesn't expect the impossible. He only expects what we can do. He desired obedience to his laws, so he made it possible for all to obey. Therefore, he gave these instructions. The burnt offering wasn't to be just any bird. It was to be turtle doves or young pigeons. Note as well that no gender was required. It could be male or female. The method of offering the animal was different as well. Unlike the offering from the flock or the herd, the priest was to kill the bird at the altar by bringing its neck. The blood was to be drained at the side of the altar. From the use of the word he, if it is used consistently with the rest of the chapter, once the sacrifice was killed and the blood drained, the person bringing the sacrifice was to prepare the animal for sacrifice. The crop and the feathers would be removed and placed beside the altar on the east side, the side closest to the gate, in the place made for the ashes. He was then to split the animal at the wings, but not divide it completely, after which the priest would burn the animal on the altar. This, too, would be a sweet aroma to the Lord. So that is the burnt offering. It is these types of offerings that we most associate with the law of Moses, but there were other types of sacrifices too. We'll see one of those sacrifices in our next episode. With that, our time is up for today, Lord willing. We hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus chapter 2, verses 1 to 10, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.